If you've been riding motorcycles for decades like me, you probably have a few that still live rent-free in your head. The ones that taught you something, maybe they made you laugh, or maybe they nearly killed you. This is a story about mine. The bikes I owned, borrowed, abused, and loved over the last 50 years. And maybe you'll recognize a bit of your own story in them too. Some of these bikes were great, some were far from it. One or two nearly killed me. But they all mattered, usually more for what was happening in my life at the time than anything about the bikes themselves. Because let's face it, it's never just about the bikes, is it? My first motorcycle was a 1975 Yamaha Chappy 50cc's. Ah yes, the mighty Chappy, a generous gift to my sister and me from our older brother. It was the least off-road capable vehicle ever made, which of course meant I rode it like a dirt bike. I was 10 years old and convinced that if I just believed hard enough, this thing could conquer trails like a motocross monster. I learned to use a clutch and manual transmission on that bike, usually by stalling it in front of my friends. It had about as much power as a hairdryer, but it was my first. And we never forget our first, do we? When my sister outgrew motorcycling, or grew a social life, I jumped at the chance to upgrade. My dad and I split the cost of trading the terminally abused Chappy for a brand new 1978 YZ80. At the time, it was the hottest schoolboy motocrosser on the market. My buddies and I spent many days exploring back roads and trails on our dirt bikes. I learned so much about off-road riding, and it was probably the most fun I've ever had on two wheels. No traffic, no civilization, just two-stroke smoke, dirt, and rivers you realize halfway across are too deep. One memorable ride on that YZ was a short ride through a woods trail to get camp water from a nearby spring. It was so close that I debated taking the time to put on my helmet. I'm glad I took that time, because on the way back, my front wheel hit a rock and launched me over the bars. I landed head first on a jagged boulder, leaving about a 1-inch gouge in my helmet. That day, I learned even short rides need helmets, because jagged boulders don't care how long you plan to be out. I didn't technically own this 1977 Honda CB550K. It belonged to my brother's girlfriend, but she lent it to me to use for my first year of street riding, so I'm claiming it on moral grounds. In my opinion, the CB550K was the nicest looking of the 70s Honda 4s. It worked great and sounded even better. My brother owned a parakeet yellow 1976 model, and my first street bike ride was on the back of his. These bikes left such a mark on me that I spent 4 decades looking for another one. I eventually found one, and I'll tell you about that later in this video. My 1978 Yamaha XT200 Special was handed down to me after my brother's sudden death in late 1979. It was in pristine condition when it came to me, and of course I fixed that. I rode it a few years before things got, let's say, financially burdensome. The engine block cracked and needed to be welded, twice. The exhaust system rusted through. Then it dropped a valve into the number 2 piston, causing me to drop $719.83. Back then, $700 could buy you a decent winter beater car, with enough left over for parachute pants and a Walkman. The 750 Special was built more for comfort than for handling, apparently. I once pushed it too hard on a straight and it rewarded me with a full-blown speed wobble, the kind that turns your helmet into a confession booth. Despite all that, I loved this bike. It was my brother's, and it'll always be special, with a capital S. I traded that special money pit for a like-new, humble little 1982 Yamaha XT200 trail bike, and I never looked back. It was light, nimble, and tough. I rode it everywhere, usually with the front wheel in the air and a dumb grin on my face. It didn't have the raw, two-stroke thrill of the old YZ80, but it was dependable and fun. Fun in runs beats fast and broken any day. A buddy from high school bought a new 1982 Honda Z50R Nighthawk as his first bike. Big bike, no experience, what could go wrong? He rear-ended a car and banged up the bike with only a couple of thousand kilometers on the clock, and I traded him even for the XT200. I fixed up the Nighthawk for not much money, and it became my reliable daily rider for a couple of years. Eventually I traded it for a car, and the Nighthawk's next owner drove it under a semi-trailer. He lived, but ended up in a wheelchair. A friend of mine said that bike was cursed. I tell that story in another video. Check it out if you're into cursed machines and questionable trades. My 1977 Suzuki Water Buffalo came to me in boxes. The engine and transmission had been completely taken apart by the previous owner, and I traded an old snowmobile for it. I reassembled it using a shop manual, divine guidance, and the extensive engine building expertise I had acquired by the age of 19. These were the first water-cooled production bikes. Smooth for a two-stroke, but still weird and heavy. Water Buffalo was a fair nickname. I didn't ride it much and eventually traded it for some cash, an engineering textbook, and a keg of beer. That sounds like a joke, but honestly, it was one of my better deals. I found this 1979 Can-Am MX250 in a retired guy's basement. He bought it for fishing trips. Yes, fishing. Nothing says quiet lakeside relaxation like a snorting two-stroke. He flipped it over backwards on his first ride, then parked it for good. I made him an offer and it was mine. The infamous MX250 was given the name Black Widow by test riders, which should be a clue. It had a flexible frame, terrible suspension, and brakes made of wishful thinking. But it had a healthy dose of that sweet two-stroke power band, and it was loads of fun if you could keep it pointed in the right direction. I bought a 1982 Seca 650 as a fixer-upper. The engine needed a new cam chain and the carburetor insides were a crusty green nightmare. I didn't think I could salvage those carbs, so I went to buy a used set from the late great Toad of Toad Cycle Works in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Toad talked me out of replacing the carbs and told me to use Mopar combustion chamber conditioner, and it works better than any other product I've tried for cleaning carbs. You used to be able to get it at Dodge dealers, but apparently the company that made it went bottoms up during the pandemic. Even after I got that old Seca on the road, it was still just worn out, and it was never reliable. I made another video about this bike and how I refused to sell it to a naive teenager. He wanted to tour the US with it. I wouldn't have trusted it to tour the neighborhood. I eventually traded it to a landscaper as payment for some yard work. Best trade ever. We bought our 1986 Honda Z50R for the kids. What can you say about these little marvels that hasn't already been said? They're bulletproof reliable and fun for anyone to ride. Honestly, I think the adults rode this one more than the kids. Our kids have long outgrown it. I plan to restore it, just to bribe the future grandchildren to visit. I bought a 1999 Kawasaki KLR250 in 2004. It had been a police bike, and it was new aside from a few scuffs. Battle scars from chasing down very slow criminals, I guess. This vintage of KLRs were simple but rock-solid bikes. Kawasaki had hardly changed them between 1983 and 2007. They were a bit heavy and didn't have the best suspension for any type of riding, but they could do everything in a passable way. I had a lot of fun on this, trail riding with buddies, including our son on the Z50R, and commuting around the city. I sold it about 6 years later for almost as much as I paid for it. Those old KLRs didn't hold the road very well, but they certainly held their value. A colleague at work had a 1984 V65 Sabre in her garage after her ex left it behind 12 years earlier. She sold it to me in 2015 for almost nothing, and I was pleasantly surprised that it only needed a minor restoration. I took a few months and gave it a complete refurb. It turned out quite good, and it was my reliable daily rider for 5 years. The engines in these bikes were an engineering wonder in 1984, incredibly powerful, even by modern standards, and bulletproof, aside from issues some of them had with camshafts, which didn't affect mine. I eventually sold this bike to make room in my garage and my pocketbook for a Goldwing. I would say that of all the bikes I've sold, this is the one that I regret parting with the most. After fixing up the Sabre, I had an itch for another restoration project. I wanted to find an old CB550, but I eventually came across this 550. It had been sleeping indoors for 34 years and needed a full restoration, but it was all there. I got it running not long after bringing it home, but life got in the way and it set for a couple of years before I could roll up my sleeves to dive in for a full frame-off restoration. That took about 9 months, and a solid chunk of money. Don't forget the money. It looked great, ran beautifully, and made all the right sounds. Still, 2 years later, I found myself enjoying the memory of restoring it more than actually riding it. Plus, I needed the garage space. Tough decision, but I sold it to someone who appreciated it, and I even managed to get more than my money back. That rarely happens. I guess I should have framed a receipt. The V65 Sabre is a fun daily rider, but it's not exactly cut out for long-distance touring, especially not with a passenger. Comfort-wise for us 50-somethings, it felt somewhere between a church pew and a jackhammer. In the summer of 2020, we decided we'd look at touring machines and ended up buying this 2008 Goldwing. It has all the options and accessories we wanted, the mileage was fairly low, and the price was reasonable. The videos on my channel make it clear that I love this bike. I have an obvious bias for the Goldwing, but reviewers rave about them, and if you try one, you'll understand why. They're extremely comfortable, smooth, and accelerate like a fighter jet. They handle amazingly well for such a big bike, thanks to a low center of gravity. They have a bottomless well of torque, and they're built for hundreds of thousands of reliable miles. YouTube's Regular Cars calls the Goldwing the best motorcycle in the world. Believe what you will, but I know it's the best in my world. In 2022, after decades of searching and eventually giving up, I somehow stumbled across a 1976 Honda CB550 in parakeet yellow. Same year, same color as the one my late brother John had back in the day. It was 20 minutes away, reasonably priced, and miraculously still available. It's not 100% original and it needs some minor work, but it runs well now, and I tinker away at fixing it up while I ride it every chance I get. Because when I ride it, I'm not just twisting a throttle. I'm rewinding time and riding alongside my brother. So there you have it, a lifetime of motorcycles, mistakes, memories, and the occasional barter for beer kegs and textbooks. Some of these bikes were brilliant, some were disasters, others were somewhere in between. But even the worst ones make for good stories, because each one taught me something about mechanics, riding, life, or the joy of third-degree burns the size of a playing card. If you've got bikes like these in your past, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear about your Chappies, Black Widows, or cursed Nighthawks. The ones that meant something, even if nobody else got it. Thanks for watching. And remember, it's never just about the bike.